So this video ended up being way longer than I thought it was going to be, but I wanted to be thorough, I wanted to be in depth and kind of go over the whole thing of how everything's going. It's messy. But I mean, the rack is pretty cool, and I feel like the technical aspect of getting your band up and running with backtracks and in-ears and stuff is something that's relatively new, but really actually accessible. I will say up front, there is absolutely no need to go as ridiculous as I did. Half this stuff can probably be substituted with something less expensive or is almost completely unnecessary, just to get backtracks going, just to get in-ears going. I guess later on, you know, if people have questions, I could do a how you could do it cheaper, how you could do it easier sort of setup, but you know, it works. It's exactly what we wanted, and we didn't cut any corners. We didn't I didn't go to like a second best option for anything, I feel. You know, I saved money where I could, but I'm very happy with the overall outcome, and our next show coming up hopefully will be made better because of it. So it would be upfront and straightforward right at the beginning of the video. The total of, I guess if you were to buy everything new, obviously depending on some shipping and stuff like that, but I didn't buy everything new, first off, so I did not spend this much. But it's probably so close that it doesn't matter. So the total roughly that I'm calculating is $10,500. So plus tax and probably some shipping charges here and there. So 10 grand. Takes way more time and effort and energy than I would have liked, and money. But now it's finally together in exactly the way that I had originally envisioned. So I figured, because I don't think that there's enough of this kind of stuff out there, I thought it'd be cool to do a rundown, kind of show everything that we're using, how we're using it, because I found that jumping into something like this was very overwhelming and made me feel really stupid a lot of times, and made me want to cry a lot. But now that it's together, it's a pretty cool rig. Okay, so this has been a long time in the works, but it's comprised of an SKB rack on top and a road case on the bottom. They're both 12 units. The road case is a little bit bigger, not significantly so, but has casters on the bottom, so we use that as the base. But got a Furman power conditioner. X32, which is kind of the staple of all of these things. You really can't do anything without it. And then we're using 3 Phoenix Pro PTM 10s, which are stereo IEM transmitters. And then we have a drawer down here where we keep all of our stuff. So we have three receivers, and then we have a spare just in case, and some extra stuff. At the moment, right now, drums just gets run off the front output, and then I have a main level control right here, since drums are always going to be stationary, but another transmitter will be added to this, so then that way we can have more control over the individual mixes, and it makes it easier to not be plugged into this necessarily, because this could always get unplugged. Then up top we're running another Furman. Then we have the iConnectivity Mio XM, which is a MIDI and USB hub. So it actually branches out our, we have a MIDI out running out the back, which goes to our lights setup that I'll get into in a second. And then it actually USB connects to the quad Cortex as well, so we can send MIDI changes directly here. Then we have the Line 6 G90 for wireless guitars. Then we have a Seymour Duncan Power Stage 700, which we are using to run left and right cabs out. Then we have quad Cortex on a rolling rack here, so we can adjust stuff as we need. Now with quad Cortex, we're actually running 2 guitars in. One of our guitar tracks is running DI out through the session into the onboard card on the X32 and out the output into the quad Cortex. And then it's just lined up, it's actually lined up exactly the same as how we have our main guitar tone set up. The only difference is you have to adjust the kind of gain and volume stuff a little bit. And then it's going out to the Seymour Duncan into the cab that we use. We use two Mesa Boogie V30 cabs and 4x12s. And then we have an output running for both of those where we can bring them back into the splitter and then split it to front of house so that they have they don't have to mic up guitar. We can hear both guitar tracks in our in-ears however we want, and then go ahead and adjust it from there. Then now one of the more recent additions to the setup here is the Boom Lights LC8, which I stumbled across randomly. I wanted to add lights to the show. I wanted to have individual control. A lot of things I saw over DMX didn't offer what I had envisioned in my mind. I wanted something I could directly MIDI control and have, you know, like synchronized light shows. I actually randomly stumbled across this company, and it's actually exactly what I was looking for. You can actually MIDI program your lights based off of 3 different notes and combinations to make different light combinations, and literally as if the same way that you would program MIDI drums, program lights to it. Super time intensive, and I can go over that in the session. And then here's the back routing that we have going on in here. There's a little light setup in the back, and cables are kind of a mess. Then running off the back here of the X32 rack on the bottom, we have seismic audio. It's a 5-foot and 15-foot tails, but this is a seismic audio splitter off of 16 different inputs. So this needs to get relabeled for the new way we're setting things up, but just enables us to send different tracks into our in-ears that would be live sound, and then have those split to front of house as well. So it just gives us more control, and that's the whole reason why we wanted to go with this sort of setup. Then I rigged up this router panel. It's just a normal panel you would find, standard 1 unit aluminum, and a normal router. Just mounted up, drilled some holes, mounted the spacing up with some Ace hardware. So very plain and simple. And then the last thing, up at the top we have some fans to keep everything cool, because the Seymour Duncan can get hot. So we tried to space everything so that we had plenty of ventilation and cooling. So the physical setup on this thing is one thing, but the internal setup in the X32 is where it can really get complicated, in my opinion, and is kind of, there's a million ways to do the same thing, and no way's wrong, no way's right. So that's one of the things I'll have to dive in a little bit more on how we had it first set up versus how we have it now set up now, and how it's different. But everything's getting routed up here to, this is a M2 MacBook Air, and everything's being routed and set up through Logic here. So I can go in and screen record there and give a better idea of what's going on. So just plugging into a little drum PA, so you have an idea of, here's the backtracks routed straight out. This is what I would hear and be able to adjust and control. So it's very much just backtracks, nothing special. But now we have added in the new setup is the lights, and then the ability to actually have the backtrack just playing as the main song, in case anybody wants to specifically listen to that, which lights are kind of the cool thing here. So So one of the newest and most important, in my opinion, additions to our new live rig is the quad Cortex. We were running a Helix before, but the reason why we wanted to do this is we wanted to consolidate space, and also the routing capabilities. You have 4 independent lines and a bunch of different routing and output options. It's like the X32's options of a million different ways to do the same right thing. The Quad Cortex has that, but just solely for guitar and bass. So we have our DI session tracks from the actual live recordings, which I had to, get in the session, put everything together, and then kind of consolidate to what I wanted being played by the second guitar. So all the songs are in here, and you just have to go through, edit, and then route it. So it's going out, the second guitar line is going into the instrument in 2, and then it's going out 3, 4. So it doesn't really matter there, but it's output 3, which gets routed into the stage left side of the Seymour Duncan, which goes out and then into the Mesa oversized cab here. So then running alongside the backtracks, everything's all lined up. And then when I hit play, I can just get so then everything runs accordingly, and then the MIDI switches are programmed in. But essentially this is a nice big way to avoid having 2 guitar players. We didn't really want to bring anybody else into the band, and kind of just complicates things and makes things harder to plan. And we like the dynamic that we have, and we have a perfect second guitar player, so we can route these tracks back in. The first line goes with no cab sim, obviously, to the cab, so live. Then the second line goes to output 2. Output 2 gets routed back into the seismic audio splitter on the back, and then comes back into the X32, which would get split off of the splitter, go to front of house. They can do whatever they want with it. And then in our in-ears, we have a perfect second guitar player that we can adjust however we want individually on our stereo in-ear mixes. So instead of running guitar and backtracks like we were before, we have a secondary live cab, so we can actually have some stereo effects and splits in areas and songs where we normally wouldn't. Okay, so this is the entire backtrack session that we are actually using. You can see the routing ahead of time with how everything is actually exported out. But basically what I started with here is one line with the LC8. So the LC8 gets routed to the Mio XM DIN 4. So it's an output on the back of the Mio. So that way, just cabling wise, everything's clean. The Ghost Cab is all single output. That just gets routed straight to output 8. So in the groupings, you can see how these sends are going to, it's the mix bus 9 through 16. Gets kind of complicated there. That's the part that starts to make my head hurt sometimes, but that's how it's routed. It goes from the session to the X32, then it gets sent from the X32 as mix bus 16 and gets sent out directly only to the Quad Cortex, and then is routed with how it's routed in the Quad Cortex. The MIDI switches are just out to the Mio, which goes out USB 1 to the Quad Cortex, because Quad Cortex can take MIDI changes either over USB or MIDI cable, so it's nice to just have less in there. The click tracks and the cues are both routed to output 7. So output 7 won't be duplicated anywhere, won't be sent to front of house, obviously. Then the main song, if anybody wants to play along to the main song on drums, I know I will, then I can put it wherever I want in my stereo mix, left, right, center. Now all of these outputs are going out mono, except for the transition tracks. There's a opening track, and then there's transitions into certain songs and transitions out. Those will all be sent out stereo just for the effect that they'll have. They're sent out outputs 5, 6, so that way they can have the stereo output routing. 808s are sent on their own output at output 3. And this is a thing where I'm probably doing some of this wrong. There's probably some stuff I'm doing that doesn't make sense, but it's a whole huge, massive, nonstop learning curve. So this is consolidated into 2 different bass drops and a fatter synth that I added in. I added in some reinforcements on most of the tracks that aren't present in the mix, just for different live reinforcements to have more of whatever effect that it is that I wanted. And then underneath there's a separate output of snare bombs, which is going to output 1, which output 1 is the main ambient output. So however everything gets sent to output 1 is how it will be mixed to front of house. So the only thing they'll have control of at front of house is the levels themselves, unless I gave them output control with a iPad into the X32, which is unlikely unless we had a dedicated sound guy. The electronics and any ambience are routed to output 1 as well. Vocals, because they're vocals, they get their own output on 2. So any vocal backtracks, anything like that is always output 2. And then I have some separate guitars, effects, stuff like that, either as guitars or down here there's a group of guitars, and everything's consolidated down into single tracks. So a lot of this is a bunch of different tracks, some reinforcements, the stems from the sessions, everything like that. It's a very time-consuming process. Basically, you're rebuilding songs you already wrote, already recorded, already released, and just building them back from scratch, just to have them exactly the way that you want them for live. At least that's what it is for me. I'm kind of meticulous about this stuff. And, piano tracks, reinforcements on certain parts, adding in parts in certain ways, changing around some things of how the sound gets output, so that way I have exactly what I want live with parts that aren't necessarily being played live. So yeah, it's a lot of tracks. It's a lot of time. All my bass is put here all the way at the bottom, because if we weren't playing with a live bass player for whatever reason, we could just route the outputs straight out from bass to a separate track and then change the whole session and not have to cancel a show. Because we don't actually have a dedicated bass player. Atticus has been filling in for us on most of our shows that we've played, but he does not live close, so it's not always necessarily easy for him to come out here to play local band level shows. But we always appreciate him, and we always have a good time. So one of the things here is when you're arranging stuff, up at the top you go into the arrangements tab, and you have to put in tempos for every song, tempo changes, time signature changes. And then once everything's arranged in kind of at least the way that you like it with the main songs, you build your click track manually, just because you want to be able to change the outputs to whoever wants to hear it, doesn't want to hear click, and be able to adjust that accordingly. So it's set out as a separate output. You don't use the DAWs click out. But then once you have all the tracks laid out, you have to put everything into these arrangements. So with the arrangement tool, what I can do is I can slide around whatever it is I do or don't want in whatever location, and change around how the order of the songs are played and stuff like that. One of the things I found that was fairly obnoxious until I figured out what was going on is you always want to make sure that everything equals one bar length, because if you go from the end of one song to the beginning of another and change the arrangement, everything will get moved forward that amount or backwards with whatever it is that is not there. So always make sure you're working from whole measures to whole measures. And then basically from there, you just have to mix out everything separately, make sure that all your outputs are matched accordingly within your DAW for however it is that you're actually going to run it. And here I can see that somewhere I was trimming stuff out, and I have a bunch of, oh, this is just in my test track. So yeah, I'm good, I'm done. But yeah, it's a lot of work that goes into putting these backtracks together. I know some other people just make a singular track of everything. I did it this way just so I could have individual mix control, just because once you put everything to one bus, it's more finalized in one single grouping. But this is how I did it. This is how we run ours. And I guess we'll see the next show how everything goes. So here is just an Amazon cart of the miscellaneous stuff that I bought, not through Sweetwater. Most of the main stuff was bought through Sweetwater. You got a battery charger. I mean, obviously there's 2 batteries per pack, and there's 4 packs. So it's kind of a super necessary thing. You can't have batteries dying. Then the 1/4 inch 2 XLRs, 3 feet ones. I wanted to have the minimum amount of cables in there as possible. So there's 6 of those for 3 IEM receivers or transmitters. Then we got the drawer, which holds our in-ears and our receivers and the spare. The quad Cortex is sitting on a shelf that pulls out. Gives us, options to mess around with routing a little bit easier and be able to pull it out and make adjustments. The heart of it is this Seismic Audio 16 input splitter with a 5-foot snake off the back and a 15-foot trunk. Back when I bought this, COVID was making stuff very difficult. I ideally would have wanted a 30-foot split, but whatever. Other options you have are using smaller Behringer ones, and then individually putting in your cables, and then you could actually probably use less than 5 feet. It's not super ideal, but it works, and it's inexpensive, gets the job done. Then you have to go printer cable to USB-C for the MacBook Air. So that's what these are for. 6 feet, just to have a little bit of extra room on those. Microphone clips, so when we're on stage, we have plenty of these. Helps just secure them. Then right angle 1/4 inches go from our quad Cortex to the Seymour Duncan. They're short. We want to keep them short. Route as little cable as possible. All of us are running KZ ZS 10 Pros. They're $50. They had great reviews, and a lot of the more expensive IEMs don't have as great of reviews. If we were going to upgrade one possible thing, each of us individually would be probably getting molds made for better sealing and better sound isolation. And then our transmitters and receivers are the Phoenix Pros PTM 10s. These things have solid reviews. Tons of people have a bunch of information on them. And for the price of 3, you would be able to get 1 Sennheiser or 1 Shure. So to me, this was kind of a no-brainer. We've got 4 shows on these. A couple different practices, no issues so far. Pretty simple to operate. And then once you get it set up, you don't really need to mess with it. Then I got to the bottom of the list and realized I forgot the router. I'm not 100% sure if this is the router. It looks like it, but I don't know why I've spent that much on a router. But, this gives you an idea for some of the extra stuff that goes into our rig. Computer-wise, I was running my Mac Mini from my studio space, which was a pain because I had to bring a monitor, had to bring a keyboard, had to bring a mouse. So I went and got the new M2 MacBook Air, upgraded the RAM to 16 gigs and storage. So the last little important thing that we have here is the LC8 light controller that I use. I can't even remember how I possibly found this thing, but I was looking for something that would go DMX to MIDI. And this came across. They have this pack that they offer. I just asked to upgrade the tubes to the 40-inch, so they did that for me. So I want to say the price was similar to what's listed here. It might be Canadian. I can't remember 100%. This has all come together over quite some time. But this is what my lighting setup is currently. Other things will get added to it. The bulk of most of the stuff that I have in the rig is from Sweetwater. Now, a lot of the stuff that's in the rig, I got secondhand, bought pre-owned, stuff like that. But this is just, putting everything in there. There's 2 Furman power conditioners, the Gator case, which I bought off of a friend. That was a Brandon Short. The G90s actually came from a fairly big band. Then the Seymour Duncan Power Stage I bought off of Craigslist. Quad Cortex, of course, I bought new. Behringer X32 RACK, I had to buy that new. The Middle Atlantic quiet panel that came with the Gator case, and then a couple different speaker on cables that we need to run from our Seymour Duncan to the live cabs. And then you'll randomly need a bunch of different XLRs for sends to front of house and stuff like that. I just put these in there. It might be a little bit more fair to not have them in there for this total out. There's a lot of extra cables and stuff that I bought, maybe on accident, stuff that I don't need. And then the SKB 8-unit roto case, the one we're using is actually an older model of this. And I basically got it for free after I bought some stuff and resold it and kept some other things. But yeah, this is basically all the stuff in the rack.